Hey, 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 how's it going?
Hey.
Should
Mm,
fix my name so it's actually spelled right. That might be a good idea.
oh no.
Give Sarah hopefully a minute to jump into. Check my email, make sure she can get in okay. I just ping Sarah, make sure she can get in okay.
Okay.
Here we go. Hey Sarah, how's it going? Oh, you're not on audio yet.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Doing good, doing good.
I'm probably gonna switch over to my phone because I've been having some weird issues today.
No worries. Yeah, once you're situated, we'll have them push us live and we'll go crazy. The blonde hair totally threw me off. I was not expecting it because your
I'm
picture
sorry.
you've got dark hair in your picture. So I was like,
Oh, I
oh,
know.
now we're blonde.
I'm very blonde. I know. I was working on I was thinking about dyeing my hair blue and purple, and then it got this blonde, and then I was like, oh no, I kind of
Kind
like
of
it.
like it.
Yeah. Okay, give me 1 second.
You're good.
Hmm.
We can hear you. Okay. Can you hear
Yeah,
us?
if you can hear me, okay, yeah, it won't, like, it just told me this meeting ID doesn't exist, so I know that's not true, but if you can hear me, okay, then I'll just keep it this way.
Yeah, we've got you. All right. You guys want to push us live, and I'll just start with kind of you doing, I'll kick off and then have you do an introduction, and then we'll just jump right in.
Okay, sounds great.
All right, Adriana, you're kicking us off, right?
Give me 1 second. It is my
Okay.
second day.
Oh yeah, no problem.
And I'm just messaging Gina because I don't think it's giving me the option that I'm supposed to have. Hold on 1 second.
All good. All good.
Sorry,
It
guys.
wouldn't be a live LinkedIn without
Some
Some
issues.
kind of issue for
right.
real.
I can jump in if need be. Just let me know. I'm here in the background. Hi, ladies.
Hey, yeah, I'm not sure if who has the right permissions to kick off.
I had transferred them over to Adriana, but I can reclaim host, being that I started the Zoom to make sure. Adriana, do I need to do that?
So I'm still not seeing the go live button like be available.
Okay, hold on.
Harry said, do you see the see more option to the right? Hold on.
Hold on, Adriana. I just reclaimed
Okay.
just so we can kind of get us going. I can renew
Yeah.
this afterward.
Okay.
Sometimes, Zoom is more user-friendly than Goldcast, but it looks like each program has their own their own set of challenges sometimes. So just bear with me. I've actually had this experience before. So I'm just waiting for it. I'm waiting right now for Zoom. It's saying preparing to live stream the webinar, and it's just loading right now. So unfortunately, I'm at the mercy of how fast this loads. So apologies.
All good.
I'm ready either way.
I'll let you guys know as I'm entering in the keys to connect everything, and then let you guys know when we go live. And then obviously I'll mute myself.
Perfect. All right. Perfect. So it sounds like people can hear us, so that is great. Thanks, Keith, for confirming that in the chat. And we're just waiting to be able to push on LinkedIn, and then we will get kicked off. So as we were discussing, lots of fun with technical difficulties.
It's not like recording is ever easy, but I imagine live is a whole nother level.
Yes. Perfect. Well, I'm going to kick off. I think we've got attendees in here already, so we've got a good amount. Look, there we go. The live stream kicked through. Perfect. Thanks, guys, for bearing with us as we worked through some of the fun Zoom to LinkedIn integration pieces. So really appreciate it, and happy you could join us for WTF is RevOps. We've got a great panelists here today. I'm actually super excited about this. Sarah and I have been, I'm going to call it LinkedIn connected. That's, I guess, the way we make friends professionally nowadays. And I think, this is really the first time we've actually sat face to face and are having like a geeked out conversation, but it's been a long time coming. So for everyone on the live today, you're in for a treat. Sarah, you want to give a little introduction, your background about yourself for the group?
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm super excited to connect with you face to face. I just realized that too. I was like, oh, we've only talked on the phone, I think.
Right.
So let's see. My background has been pretty eclectic. I've done everything from like billing and tech support to sales leadership, sales ops, and even did some consulting for a while as a Salesforce sales consultant. I landed in RevOps about 4 years ago, and I've been loving it ever since. And the biggest reason that I stay in RevOps is because it has just a little bit of a piece of everything that I love about my work. I did an assessment during like my last transition, or my transition out of 15.5. And I'm like, well, what work do I love? What work do I dislike and want to avoid? And where do I want to learn? And where do I want to grow? And I ended up right back in RevOps. So it's definitely the best of all worlds to me.
And I definitely can appreciate that, right? I've done revenue operations officially at 4 organizations now, and all of them have been slightly different. But it's still that level of fulfillment of, because it is different, I think that's what keeps me going. I couldn't imagine doing the same thing over and over every day at even at a different company. So it's that diversification and problem solving, and every company, has its own needs there. As we kick this off, friendly reminder to the group, the audience, feel free to post questions, Q&A, comments, anything you want to make sure that Sarah can help to answer, and I'll make sure that we prioritize those. But the first question's the obvious one. WTF is RevOps, right?
The age-old question. So I frequently describe RevOps as the part of the organization that keeps the gears turning and ensuring that our customers have a delightful journey throughout their entire relationship with us from beginning to end. We're also responsible for leading the decision-making process, making sure that we create the right processes to support our business decisions, optimizing those processes, systems alignment, and then responsible for all the reporting and analytics that are needed to influence all of the future decisions. I have on my LinkedIn like a cat herder and peacemaker, because a lot of what we do is related to people and just getting people to work together, which is one of the things I love about the job. And then I also do get to geek out on all the nerdy analytical stuff too.
I don't know where herding cats came from. I should probably figure that out, but that is something that we just even at Deal from our RevOps team talk about quite a bit. And, the one thing that I love about your definition of RevOps is like you started with the experience and the customer, right? And I think that that's such an important piece as we think about, operations as a whole generally is like how the wheels move in the background. But if we're not taking that customer centric approach and that mindset, like what are we optimizing for?
Yeah. Absolutely. And that too as a buyer, right? Like you think about your buying process, and so frequently are we making those decision-making like, purchases? So it's always fun to be like, okay, what would I do with this experience for this customer or this company?
Yeah. And the thing that, I try to keep top of mind and throw out a lot, and, sometimes you say it and people are like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, that makes sense. It's like, what do our customers expect from us, right? So when I call into Target because I had an issue or something like that, like I expect that they know my purchase history. I expect that they know that I use their app. I expect that they know that I'm a red card holder since like 2007, and so putting yourself in your customer's shoes, I'm like, what are their expectations that they have for you as a business partner or even as a prospect, right? Like as a prospect, like I expect that they know that I've emailed them 5 times in two weeks, right? And they're probably not thrilled about that. So how do you make sure like you manage those expectations the right way and really like level set? And you have the data. How do you use it, right? I think our customers aren't naive that they don't expect us to use the data, right? When I get on the phone with Fidelity, like I want to have a real personalized experience on like where my 401k stuff's at. And like, that's my expectation because they have that information about me.
Yeah.
I've given them that information.
Yeah. And it's so important too, when we think about our customers, especially in this role, right? It's both internal and external customers, right? We have consumers on all sides. So you also have to think, how do we make the experience just as delightful for our friends, our colleagues, like how can we make their day easier and better?
And how do we make sure like I talk about this a lot, right? The seller experience aligns to the customer experience and then is supported by the operational experience, right? So it's like, how do you really manage to those levels in the right way? And starting with the customer first. And I think sometimes we become our own worst enemies. At least I know I've been guilty of this in the past of like, just because the tool can do it and the system can do it and it's really cool, like if it doesn't actually align to the process and the people, like what I'm just building something cool that's really going to cause probably more of a mess. So how do we make sure we get that right mindset in what we're building?
Yeah, I've definitely been in a position where I've kind of like over purchased like technology, right? Live and learn.
Yeah. Hey,
But
we've all been there.
yep, absolutely.
And I laugh because it's like, especially thinking in just RevOps and budget sometimes, like there's always shiny object syndrome, right? And there's always a million tools out there. But the other part is like when you do get budget, like how do you make sure you utilize that budget? I have yet to be in the situation where I'm like, don't give me any more money.
Right.
But it's that fine balance of making sure that you're not just purchasing the purchase and there's actually like the need for it. And then, the other point of this is like, what are the point solutions, right? Versus platform solutions that we have to be mindful of how it fits into our full ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that's really important to call out too, because like the other piece that I think can be added to that is also, do we have the resources to optimize the solution? Like,
Yeah.
have we really dedicated the time and the energy to, even when we do purchase something, that we're using it to its absolute best ability? And so sometimes it's like, oh, we got it for this one cool new feature, but maybe there's overlap over here. It's definitely putting in the resources for optimization is really important too.
And a tool doesn't like augment headcount, right? So like a tool should be helping to operationalize, make sure you have the infrastructure. But like if you buy, let's just use like a routing tool, for example, and you buy this routing tool, it doesn't actually like solve your routing problem. Like
Right.
It might deliver on that, but you actually have to have an operator, you have to have a business strategy, you actually have to have requirements, you have to be able to manage those requirements. Like, Chili Piper doesn't know that I entered a new region.
Right. Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And the planning is such a big part of it too, right? And I'm frequently like, okay, we can do our experimentation in like spreadsheets and then we figure it out, then we optimize, then we go through it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we talk a lot about. At Deal specifically is like there's always champion challenger testing, right? You should always be testing. You should always have that established process, regardless of the tool. But when you're trying to figure out what the process is, how do you not do that in a way that you're automating it all and building it all out before you know if it even works, right? So like putting in those pilot groups, but the biggest thing is like defining what success is, and I think that's where people tend to get tripped up. It's like, oh yeah, we outlined it works, now go build it, right? But like what does success look like, right? And I always joke because I'm like, usually if something works and we think it works, we probably didn't do it right.
That is a good one. I definitely believe that.
It's probably not healthy mindset, but that's where the mindset is, right? It's like if you're hitting goal, you're not doing good.
Yeah. And I think sometimes the definition of success gets kind of mixed up or like too operational, right? It's like success is not getting the tool installed, right?
Right.
It's like, okay, what metrics were you going to impact as a result of the new service you're put in? Is it
ROI? Is it operate? And one of the things that we think a lot about is like operational efficiency is sometimes really hard to measure. So like if you are doing something, specifically, and Jamie, I'm going to get to your question here next, but like when you are working on, how do I operationalize like my prospecting efforts for my SDRs, right? Like, how do I measure how long it is taking them? Because that is something that's not just sitting there for the taking, right? Like we're not typically, and at least in our organization, we're not putting time tracking on our SDRs to say, start and stop the stopwatch every time you prospect. So like really, how do you start to get those baselines becomes really important too. Yeah. And how you define that and measure that. And then ultimately, what is the byproduct of that efficiency?
Yeah, I think that too. I've this is my third company in this role, and it's like, okay, like the biggest thing to understand, or like the two big projects that I take on immediately is, do we have clear metric definitions, and do we have an intake process for our team, right? And how do we get things done? And those are like lay the groundwork to ensuring we're making the right decisions.
Yeah, and then back to your point on the metrics, because this is where it's like does the business align with our metrics definitions, right? So like if marketing is calling an SQO one thing and sales is calling it another, and then the C-suite is using another term for it, and then you've got your data analytics team building pipelines off of a different definition, and then products, throwing their hat in the mix, you can't have that global reporting, right? So how do you really facilitate, the centralization of your metrics definitions?
Yeah. This time it didn't take me quite as long, which was really great. Our system is pretty fantastic in terms of our definitions and how people are using them. But still just getting it written out was extremely helpful. And then meeting with all of those teams individually first, and then together as a group to make sure we were all super clear, which is absolutely one of my most favorite parts of this role.
No, and that's always a good win. I've been in, pending where the organization is maturity wise, there's times where it's really easy to get it done. And then there's times when you're crying in a conference room because it's 2 a.m. and you're still working on something for a board deck. So
Yeah.
It's always good to take those wins when you have it. So Jamie had a great question on just asking, what tools are SDRs, BDRs, AEs using to prospect for potential customers right now? Thinking about kind of your experience, what are some of the tools in your stack?
Yeah, so I've definitely used a very wide array. So there's the DMB Hoover's product. I've used Zoom Info. I've used like Clearbit for enrichment to help us uncover things. LinkedIn Sales Navigator, also very helpful and useful. I would say those are probably the top ones. There's also other tools that focus on intent data. And so we're prospecting into the right people and not just like seeing if spaghetti sticks on a wall, right? Can we measure intent? And then any tools that you can think of. I actually don't have a tool for this, but really understanding your ICP, right? I mean, we just do analytics to know who those people are, but getting honed in on who you're contacting is way more important than the tool you're using to do it, I think.
Yeah, you've got to have that definition and that alignment. And, when you think about requirements for the tools, right? So if you have a very, very concrete ideal customer profile and you go to try to use something like, I'll just throw out, Apollo, right? If they don't have that criterion, like that's not going to help in your efficiency of how you prospect and how you identify. So being really purposeful on, what the tools are out there. And, back to your point, when you think about the Zoom Infos, the Clearbit, all of the different data providers, like there's some overlap in the accuracy in those pieces, right? It's not, I couldn't probably sit here and be like, this one's my favorite one and it's going to work 90%, all the time, right? Because it depends on the business and who you're doing business. And, if I need information for companies in France versus Argentina versus North America, like there's not there's not a global really strong provider for that. So when I think about, how you best prospect, there's like two different components of that. There's like the sourcing and identifying, right? Which is where, generally you think about like the LinkedIn Sales Navigator. And I think they've got a new product right now, like I'm going to call it Sales Insight. Is that right?
Yep. Sales Insights. Yeah.
Talking acronyms, and I never spell out the abbreviations, which are more for less for the practitioners and the SDRs and the A's, and more for like the operations and the managers to help identify the audiences. And then so you've got your sourcing, but then you have your actioning, right? So that's where you've got your ample markets, your outreach, your sales loft, and part of that goes into like, how are you trying to engage, right? Like, how do you delight and outreach to your customers? Is it phone? Is it text? Is it LinkedIn? Is it email? Is it a combination between them? Like, what is that right operational sourcing tool too?
Yeah, I do think it's very important. I would say I'm generally fairly, when I get questions like this, fairly like tool agnostic, because there's no one size fits all. It is really, really dependent on your business location, all of those things. So I couldn't reiterate that more.
Yeah, I mean, we have 3 different sequencing tools that deal, right? Just based on the nature of business and like what our requirements are for teams and regions. Like it's not a one size fits all solution. It's aligning, again, the people, process, data, technology, and then making sure at the end of the day, the technology supports the process and not the other way around. And if that means that we have to have multiple tools to support that, then that's what we need. if that's how we need to support the processes based on, you know, decentralization.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point.
I mean, it doesn't make things easy on like the RevOps side, right? Because it's
No.
more to manage and more to think about, but it's what's necessary to support the business. And like, those are the types of decisions and like conversations like you have to be really mindful of, because again, it's not always one size fits all, as much as, you know, I wish it was.
Yeah. The only other like thing that I would think about too is where you can get like an integrated platform, like make sure you're using that in your like criteria, right? Like the more, like, I know it gets kind of scary because you feel like you're putting all your eggs in one basket, but it's like the more you can administer one tool that has many different functions, just the better and easier it is on your team. If you can do it, like you said, sometimes it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the concept of the platform versus like the point solution, and being really mindful of, you know, there's a lot of really great point solutions, but like, are they point in time solutions is the other thing to think through. Is like, am I purchasing just a point in time solution to solve this pain point, or am I really looking at like the future state of what I need to do? And when you think about this, you know, the thing that I think comes up a lot is the investment, and being able to really concretely like map out the investment. Because it's not just, hey, I'm going to buy this tool for $20,000 a year, right? Like, yeah, obviously, yeah, that is a cost to it, but it's what is the capital that goes into implementing that tool. I think a lot about this in my background in, you know, marketing automation platforms, right? It's like, oh yeah, we're going to migrate from Marketo to Pardot because, you know, it's cheaper. Pardot's cheaper, right? But like, what's your cost of migration? And then what's also like your loss that you're going to take from migrating, right? So there's historical loss that you take, regardless of if you think you've migrated everything, you have not.
Yeah.
So like being really, really mindful of like that cost savings too. You know, when you think about adding a tool to your stack, like you really shouldn't look at this as like, yeah, we're adding a one year subscription kind of tool, and then we're going to outgrow it and do something else. Make the right investment and do it the right way. And, you know, ideally negotiate it the right way too, so you can grow into it.
Yeah, I think it has been difficult to have those conversations for me to generally be convinced to switch technologies. I'm always like, ugh. Especially marketing automation. But you know, it's like one of those things where it's like, you're right. Sometimes though, it is worth it. Whether it's an increase in a metric that you believe that you might get, that they've proven out with their ROI calculators, which I think are great tools, or just the general cost, like it could work out, but just be mindful of all the different points.
Yeah. The big thing, like I always think about is like, don't purchase a tool because of a person, and don't migrate a tool because of a person, right? You know, I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that companies make, is like I'm gonna pick on marketing, right? Because it's the easy one to pick on. So sorry for everyone in the crowd on this. Is like, you know, you're evaluating marketing automation platforms and the CMO loves Marketo, right? Like,
oh yes.
I've been that guilty person too. So I'll fall on my own sword here, but like, you can't buy a tool because of the people, right? Like you shouldn't hire people based on the tool either, right? Like it shouldn't be, oh yeah, I'm only going to hire just because we have HubSpot. I'm only going to look at HubSpot people. Like ideally you want a specialist in like true marketing operations and understands like the fundamentals of marketing operations. Obviously there's value in the tool, but like getting the right candidate who can think agnostically outside of a tool too and learn the tool is a completely different ballgame than somebody who only knows how to do specifically in the tool. And maybe this is like my unpopular revenue operations perspective, but like I generally like, I think people naturally are going to like be familiar with what they know and enjoy certain tools more than others. I mean, happy to have a conversation with anyone on that topic any day of the week, but it's like, how do you make sure like you're really hiring and managing and setting expectations based on like the skill set outside of like the tool?
Yep. I can agree more.
I mean, when we get into Dynamics and Salesforce, I might have a completely different opinion there, but that's maybe a whole other series.
Yeah.
What's a common misconception like you think people typically like have on revenue operations, or what's something you've had to, you know, I'm going to say set straight, but I mean that in the best possible way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the time, which is kind of ironic given the cadence of this conversation, but people look at RevOps a lot like systems only, right? It's like it's just systems, right? So they administer the systems, they configure the systems, they get the reporting out of the systems, and that's kind of it. And although that is an important piece of the role, it's certainly not the only piece. So I think that's one that we frequently have to like, no, it's not just that. And I can't just execute on like adding a field without any thought or process or impact analysis.
Yeah, we're not just IT help, not to knock IT help desk play a very important role, but right, it's not just ticket takers and that thing. And I think, I'd love to get your thought on this, because this is something I think a lot about, is like typically like at the point that a company is building up, a revenue operations organization, or like centralizing kind of that operations function, like it's generally out of need. A pain point's been identified. And I think a lot of times that pain point is a systems pain point, right? Like that becomes kind of like that friction point of like, oh yeah, we really need to hire somebody to manage Salesforce, right? Or hire, and then that becomes like that established piece there. But then because of that, like we're getting put in more of like the reactive bucket, right? Like RevOps organically is starting from reaction, which is okay, right? Because like that is where scale comes from and predictability comes from, is the nature of being reactive. But it's such a like uphill battle to switch. And I was just talking to Jeff about this a few, like literally 30 minutes ago, is like, how do you go from reactive to active to proactive, right? And like building that nature. And like we talk about RevOps getting like a seat at the table, which is really hard to do when all you're doing is the reactive work. So would love to kind of get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think that it's one of those things, it's like I've done it wrong before for sure, right? And it's like, oh,
I might
like,
still be doing it wrong, to be honest with you.
That's what I like when I started at Revenue, it was like, hey, I can't promise that I know how to do all this right, but I can tell you all the ways I've done it wrong and that I won't repeat those things, right? It might not be optimal, but I do think that frequently, we get thrown into an extremely reactive scenario, and then we're also looking at it, or have looked at it, by how many tasks are you completing, and not necessarily what is the impact of those tasks. So I think it's really, really important to think about, to hone in on your project management skills, right? It's such a vital part of like, one, are you doing the right work? Are you giving visibility to your work? Are you having an impact? And you mentioned, like, what's the measure of success? And it's like, okay, what metric are you going to impact by executing on a specific task? And so I think that once you start getting into better project management, like I'm Scrum Master certified, so it's like we go through it and make sure like this is the visibility that we need to do, and these are the right priorities, and trying to make them as thematic as possible too is really helpful, just so that you have a container.
Yeah, no, definitely. I've been doing some mentorship on revenue operations recently, and a mentee asked me, he's like, what's the first thing I should do, right? Like I'm a team of one coming into this. And I was like, the first thing you need to do is build your roadmap, right? And I know like it takes time to build the roadmap, but you need to have something that you can anchor back into, that you can walk through and explain and like lean into, whether the priorities change or not. It goes back to kind of like the project management. You need a plan, right? Yeah. Like if you don't have a plan, you won't get out of like that responsive nature. And like everything we do is going to have, the project management components, and like all of the work is going to be there, and it's never going to go away. If you're in RevOps and you don't have enough work to do, like would love to talk, because are you hiring? No, just kidding. But you've got to have something to anchor back to, otherwise you're just flying, right? And so building that roadmap, having that, in the last 3 companies, I've literally had a deck that like I carried around, right? That was like my walk around deck, so I could explain where we were, understand what our priorities were, and force people to like be able to make those decisions too when they made the other ask. And then obviously back to your point, like the intake process, and having a way to track and like help people visualize the work. We've started using Jira, and I'd like to say like I wear a shirt that says I love Jira. I don't, but I know I need to. Like I know it's such an important piece because what's sitting on my desk right now in terms of like my to-do list like doesn't give visibility to the organization. And it doesn't help my CRO make decisions based on where my time needs to be spent and allow
Mollie,
for that.
did you just show a Post-it note? No.
I've got those. I wish I could take a picture of my desk. It might traumatize people. I have way too many Post-it notes and to-do lists, but it's now all in Jira. So
yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's something that I've taken on as well. We're currently using Asana. Our team uses Jira on the engineering side. I found it's a little. I don't quite need that level of robustness. It's like, it's very, because it's very, very intricate. I've also used TaskRay before, which is built on Force.com, which is a good one. I've used a number of different tools, but I do think it's a very, very important piece of it. Like you said, visibility, tracking, also accountability for your team, right?
Yep.
So we do like 15-minute stand-ups every day. Like, what are you working on today? Did we have a shift in priorities? Why did you move this around when it wasn't originally in the sprint? Or why did we move something out of it?
Yeah, even if you're a team of one, right? Like I think, anyone who's a team of one, I think the ambition is that you're not staying as a team of one forever. So how do you start building that muscle and building that like framework and managing that up so that when you make your next hire, when you make, that growth, you have that you have that track, you have that muscle, you have that piece, because now you're hopefully managing somebody else, right? Maybe that's the right career path. And like you have that in place. Claire, to your point, like I do mean a revenue operations specific roadmap. The way that I typically build this too, right, is I generally take a roadmap and Sarah would love to get your perspective on how you build, but I typically build a chart, and I should probably just post this and share this. Like that's just a table of like, what are the functions of revenue operations, right? So like, what is marketing, for our structure, what's marketing operations, what's sales development operations, what's sales operations, what's partner operations, what's enablement, all the different kind of pillars. And then I build like lines, and this breaks out by quarter as well, and typically aren't going deep into the months at the high level, but what's business as usual, right? So I really make sure to call out like, what are the business as usual tasks that this function is responsible for? Because that is a huge component of the day-to-day work.
Yeah, you can't just forget that.
You can't, and you've got to account for that. And you want to make like, I want it to be really clear, like which team owns that and which function owns that, as well as then what are like the big deliverables that we are hoping to achieve within that time period. And then what are the like systems that support this. So it is clear which team is like really running in which systems and alignment. Again, this roadmap's not for like, let's get in and prioritize things. This is more for like being able to quickly educate and like display and like keep people aligned. And then where do we have dependencies, right? And I typically, when I talk about the dependencies piece of it, it's not within our own team, but it's like, where do we have other stakeholders and dependencies for pieces? So they're called out. If we're trying to launch a new website or something like that, right? Who do we need to be dependent on to help support that? So it is revenue operations specific roadmap. It's really not just like siloed into us and our work, because we are so codependent on our stakeholders and our support resources. So I would love to learn how kind of like you build roadmap for your team and like kind of educate on prioritization and efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. So the framework that I've used for the first piece we were talking about is the EOS accountability chart, right? It's just like what functions belong to which groups of people, and making sure that a specific task is only one person is responsible for that function, right? Is really important, because when you have shared prioritization, that's very, very difficult to hold anybody accountable. So the accountability chart has been really helpful. Also, a tech stack assessment I've done like very, very early on, and just really understanding what what does that look like and how are the teams using it? So very similar to what you're speaking of. I actually don't have a framework to have them all together. So I would be interested in seeing how you structure that as well. But definitely hit on all the individual pieces. The other thing that I also like to take a look at when I have a team of people is what are their individual kind of goals? What are their personal goals and their career goals? So I can make sure that like when we have a task that's going to, come up and something we know, like, does this person want to get stretched into this to learn? Or is it something that they just want to, some people do just want to be heads down, like, like order entry type work. And that's okay too. There's a place for every one of those roles, but really honing in on what are people's like career aspirations is definitely a mechanism I use to help with that as well.
My favorite thing that I've done as a manager, and I probably did this on a fluke several years ago, but it's worked out well for me, is like I've always told my direct reports, if you see something that I'm working on that you want to work on, right? Like you're seeing me do something that you're like, man, I really wish I could do that. Tell me, because I'll give it to you, right? And I will help support you along the way, right? Like I want to know what you want to do, because typically when you get people who are doing work that is interesting to them and fulfilling to them, and they want the at bat, like I want to give that at bat to them. And that's, I've had people who have really leaned into that, and others who are like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, try me, like ask. Cause like, I want to help you grow and I want to help support you, whether they've been people that I've directly managed or just people that I've worked with. It's like, that's how we grow, how we coach. So any advice to managers, like offer that up. Also people who maybe aren't managers, ask, right? Like what's the worst that can happen? You can be told no.
Yeah. I would say like, I always ask, and it's probably a question I ask maybe like every 6 weeks. It's just like, okay, now what are you looking to do? Now, how are you looking to further your career? Now, what do you want to learn? And then also proactively asking for feedback on myself as well. Like, what do you wish I did differently in this scenario? Or how do you, what are things that I can improve upon? Or even, what am I doing great? I'd love to know that too. But it's a really, really important part of the relationship, regardless of RevOps or what's, but any managerial function.
For sure. And the other thing, and I know we've got a good amount of questions that I promise I'm not ignoring and I will get to. The other thing I think about here as well is like, obviously getting that feedback and getting that perspective. Now I'm trying to remember where I was going to go on my train of thought on this. Well, maybe I might have just lost it. So sorry, guys. It was probably not super cool anyway, but bummer. I hate it when that happens.
It'll come back.
it'll come back and I'll jump in, but jump into questions. So I recently heard consolidate and automate as the new theme when purchasing technology from others in RevOps roles. Would you agree, or what lens are you looking through when evaluating new technology?
Yeah, so I think that if you can consolidate and it's not too painful, it's very similar. Like, what is the capital that needs to be spent? Are you actually going to save money? Like making sure you're looking into all those things, and what is the true impact of making those switches or adding some new functionality? I would say like I do lean towards platform solutions as much as I can, and evaluating each of the different components with, my own set of rigor and requirements for each one. And then it's like, if there are multiple platform solutions that meet it, then prioritizing which are our most important areas of improvement where we think the technology is going to help. I also get really weird about automate everything, right? I think people tend to jump right into automation because we can,
because it's cool, right?
Because it's cool and it's
the
fun.
geeks in us like that, right? Like that's the challenge.
It's like, oh, I built this really cool button and it does this, 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 and this, and then sometimes you're like, well, that's cool, but who's going to use it? But it was fun to build.
Because you can doesn't mean you should, right?
Yeah. But I do love automation, and where there are many areas where it can come in and be extremely useful. Certainly God, I think about a CPQ product or something like with order form creation. Some of that stuff can save time when utilized properly. And then there's also cool technology out there like Revenue.io, where we can, automate prompts in our Moments product for real-time coaching instead of just always going back to listening conversation intelligence tool. So like that is an automation that I think is extremely useful and very, very like helpful.
Yeah, I've got two follow-up questions for you. One of which is like, how do you work with the consolidation of technology outside of just the revenue organization, right? So one of the things, like as you look at overlap between IT or product or other facets of the business, right? What's your general approach for, not duplicating just company technology?
Yeah, I usually start with the full technology stack for the entire company to identify overlap. I have a standing meeting with every single department head in the company, and making sure that we are always on the same page, because even though RevOps isn't in product or in engineering, right?
Right.
We're still very, very tied at the hip, because if you think about the full customer journey, the full customer experience, they don't look at us individually in any way, right? Like it is the entire experience. So making sure that all those things are aligned and easy, and saving costs too. So I think it's really important to do a full assessment and then, make friends with people and understand what they're trying to achieve. So maybe if you want to suggest changing a piece of technology, being really, really buttoned up on why it would benefit them, why we should consolidate, what is good for the company, what's good for the customer. And then as long as you know those things ahead of time, I think it's easy to make suggestions and then help them through the change. Because sometimes some departments aren't used to that either.
It's also a lot easier to get budget when it is actually cross-functional value too. There's, an art of splitting cost where it makes sense, right? Yep. The other advice that I give to people, if you're like, I don't know what our full tech stack is, because I've walked into more situations than fewer situations where there is not a centralized technology stack or owner or procurement, go to finance. Somebody pays the bill.
Yep.
So that's generally like the best place to start to understand what you have and who bought it and why you have it. The other fun thing is if you're really not sure, just block unauthorized apps from integrating to Salesforce, and enough people will yell at you, you'll figure it out really fast.
But that's even though like you just kind of, it is really funny. Because that type of assessment is really important. And I do the same thing where it's like, okay, like, we have 10,000 reports in Salesforce or whatever, right, in our CRM. Yeah. And it's like, those are not all being used. I'm just like, I'm going to delete them and I'm going to leave them in the recycle bin for 7 days and we'll see what happens.
And you'll learn really fast.
Yep.
Especially if you do it the last of the month, right? Like that's the right timing, start pushing boundaries then. Yeah. Another good question we had was, how is RevOps different than sales ops, right? If a sales ops person is moving to RevOps role, like how should that transition be?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think that, right, sales ops it's a very, very important function that generally sits right under revenue operations and should, in my opinion, or at least adjacent, right? Yep. So, it's a lot of scrutinizing a very particular piece of the business, which is a skill that you're going to need in RevOps as well. But in RevOps, you have to zoom out and you have to think about everything from the buyer journey, from awareness, all the way through potential renewals, depending on what your product mix is like. Yep. So you have to really zoom out, and like you want to get pretty honed in on marketing ops, sales development ops, sales ops, CS ops, even product ops is super, super helpful. And finance is, you mentioned finance, it's really important to work closely with them. So just start breaking out little bits and pieces to try to learn, like sit side by side with your marketing ops person, or sit with an SDR, right? If you're doing just sales ops and don't have the sales development function. I strongly suggest doing like 30-minute meetings weekly, at least with one-on-one with a frontline person, so that you can really understand what is their day-to-day like, what are they struggling with, what do they love, and bringing that all together and carrying it through the entire, and making sure that makes sense for the customer as well.
And my guess is, Sarah, it's not the same frontline person, right?
No.
And it's always not your top performer either.
Oh, no, not at all. Actually,
Yeah.
I do a sign up sheet. And I'm just like, if you want to talk, I'm here. And literally
Yep.
it's just like, sometimes, you know, it might be like just a gripe session, which is also okay. Right. And I always say like, hey, I'm going to write down everything that's bothering you, but that doesn't mean I'm going to do it all. So, but like, just be very clear when you're having that type of
Just
meeting.
because you ask doesn't mean
Yep.
that it's going to be delivered, right?
Yep.
And we started something with like office hours, right? And like really just building out kind of office hours that are standing. And obviously there's value. I think there's value in the feedback, right? And having a place to feedback, learn, kind of explain, coach, but then there's also value in the shadowing too. And I think from like an ops perspective, we probably don't do enough of that. Right. And this is one thing when we get into the systems and the process piece that I think tends to hurt us, right? Because we build based on what we think the logic should be versus, again, back to the experience, like what is the Salesforce user experience, right? When they're going to create an opportunity, like what is that muscle that they're using? Because trust me, like they know how to use Salesforce as a user better than we do as admins.
Yeah. Yeah, they know all the tips and tricks. And then it's like, I'm like, you know, sometimes it's like, oh, how many clicks can I just reduce for them? Just watching somebody, because it's really hard to, I think, when you leave it open-ended, because I've tried that before, where I'm like, hey, what can I help you with? And people get stuck. It's too open. So instead, I'm like, share your screen. We're going to record it. Walk me through what your day is, right? So just sit down at your computer like it's the first minute of the day, and where do you go, what do you do, and why? And undoubtedly they will come up with something like that's like, oh, I hate that I have to do this, or I have this deal that this is happening with. And so that's really, really helpful insight. It's made a big difference. Plus, yeah, then you get to meet lots of people.
just the art of asking why, right? And I feel like my 5-year-old when I do this to people, but so I've got 6 Sigma green belt and have done like the rapid process improvement where like literally all you're doing is post-it notes on a wall and asking why. And you're like, you know, as a parent, it's like the most annoying thing ever, because you just want to be but like when you start actually like probing on that, like people either have a really good reason why or they don't. And they are like, yeah, why am I doing that? Right. And like, it becomes so much more like obvious too. The other like big art of this is like, how do you make them think it's their idea? And how do you like actually have them, you know, from a RevOps perspective, like the less I own the solution, the better. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. That's what I'm frequently, I was actually just talking with Brad Smith yesterday, and I'm like, I don't want the credit. Like, I don't need it. That's not my job, right? I want to make sure that person's day was easier, or that, you know, we improved significantly in a company-wide metric. Like, those are the things that are important. And I'm never doing it alone. I'm never alone in that, right? Like, that's never just me.
And when we go back to like our whole concept of like piloting and trialing, like if you don't have advocates for that and aren't taking like key people through this, like you've got to have the champions. And like you have from a revenue operations perspective, you have some of like your best champions in the company, right? You've got your marketers who like know how to position and know how to place and like know how to, I don't want to say cheerlead, but like know how to cheerlead. Yeah. And then you have your sellers, right? Who know how to close it and like influence in that way. So it's like, use your resources to like get things done that you need to get done. And if you're not doing that and going through that and you're trying to just push through, like you're going to push the boulder. Yeah. Right. What is it? Flies like honey and vinegar or some whatever analogy it is, right? Like we've got to make those friends.
Definitely. Well, it's like, I honestly like, technically, right, we're all in sales. We all need to get things done, right? And so if you if you approach your idea or somebody else's idea very similar to like a sales process, like understanding what the pain is, understanding what the requirements are, like it's not really that much different. You're just doing it internally, just a different audience. And I think sometimes people forget that.
Yeah, absolutely. If you were to build kind of a RevOps process or RevOps team from like the ground up, like what's step one?
Yeah. So I honestly think if I was a team of one and about to expand, the way that I've thought about doing this, which I I guess this is the way that I did it when I was at 15.5, is, bringing on somebody, who is a good, basically like counterpart to your own deficits, right? So like the areas where I am weak, which could be in anything, right? But my first hire would be a generalist of some kind, but it's like, where do I not have a skill set that I could learn something from somebody from, is
Yep.
usually the first place that I would go. And then after that, it really just depends on the needs of the business and the areas of the buyer's journey that are suffering, and making sure that we really need to hone in. I think it's also dependent on your product a little bit too. It's just like,
Yep.
okay, like how are you of like in my situation, right? Work at a RevOps company in RevOps. So it's like, okay, like how do we want to, approach
Been
that?
there, done that one.
Yep. Yep. So I hate to say it, right, but I don't think it's one size fits all. The only thing that I would do is make sure you're looking to your team's strengths and your own strengths and being very honest about it. So strengths, and then also desire for improvement,
Yep.
right? Or areas to learn in. And then you can build it out from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you hit just being really mindful and honest with yourself on that too, right? I think, so much in the hiring process is like you gravitate towards people that are like you, right? And that's just like a natural thing, not even in hiring, like that's just a life
Yeah.
thing. And so it's like, how do you really do that assessment of kind of self and company and where you're at, and be really, really purposeful on that? Because I don't think you typically go into an interview and be like, yeah, I want to hire that person because they're the exact opposite of me. Right. Like
Definitely not.
kind of thing. So it's like being, coming up and being really honest on like that profile that you're looking for, and then knowing the right questions to ask to get to those responses and those pieces. And another question that came in mentioned the analysis of at what point do you consider something like CPQ? The context is, I think it will help out, but our exec team thinks it's a commodity. So what have been like the drivers when you consider implementing something new?
Yeah. I would say a lot of the time, it's very similar to what we were talking about before, but it's like, what is the capital that you have to expend to do it? And what is the impact that it's going to have by bringing on the technology? So,
Yep.
like, and not to pick on CPQ, but, it's like, it's a very labor intensive implementation that is great for alignment and finance, right? It's really, really great for that. And adherence, compliance, those types of things. But like from a sales rep perspective, I haven't heard anyone say that they love it. Like, because it technically can make their job sometimes more tedious
Yep.
than whatever they were doing before. But it's just like, okay, are you making the right people happy? And what are the success metrics of those, of those choices?
Yeah, absolutely. I think CPQ is always the one that comes up in these scenarios, right? You get the flip side. It's either like we feel like we need CPQ, and then the questions you start asking are like, oh yeah, like how often has your pricing changed in the last 3 months? Or like, what are your plans for adding new products? Like, what's that? And you're like, you're not stable enough for CPQ, right? Just knowing like pending the CPQ solution that you implement too, because obviously there's a scale that you can do.
Yeah.
It still is a labor intensive implementation, and generally works best when you have some stability in what you're offering, right? Because that is ultimately kind of when you think about the goal and the standardization and the output that you're looking at is that consistency. And so if your business is not consistent yet, or potentially not planning on remaining consistent in those natures, like you might put a lot of administrative time into something that you're consistently reworking. Let's see how many times I can say consistent. And then there's like the flip side of it is like where you are like, man, we do need a CPQ, but then it's like, yeah, but we don't want to pay, 6 figures to implement a CPQ, which is generally what we don't want to pay 6 figures in 6 months to get us there. And then it's like, but where are we at today? And what is like the actual long-term value and opportunity cost of this too?
Yeah. And I think with this type of tool in particular, and probably with any tool, it's like, when you're looking back and you're assessing, like, was this like a successful implementation, or like, did we do the right things? You have to understand that, like, your first 3 months is so much different than your next 9, right? Like you will learn so much more, and it will continue to improve and iterate. So even though you launch a new tool and maybe everyone doesn't love it, it will continue to get better, right? Like as long as you're giving it the time and attention that it needs, it will be a better experience for everyone all in. As long as you're focused on, again, what success looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing to remember is like consistently ask for feedback, right? This is the one piece that I try to be really mindful of, and like try not to blanket like the ask for feedback, right? Like tell me what we're doing well, right? Being very, very specific to your point of like when you give the probing questions and the details, it's a lot easier for people to focus on. But like getting that feedback and figuring out how you can iterate and how you can optimize. I know I just got my ping that we've got to wrap up as the Rev Genius has another webinar kicking off. So hopefully audience can join that. But Sarah, any final parting thoughts? Like this has been I didn't even go through all the other questions I had. This has been great conversation.
No, it's been great. I just think like a lot of the time, I know the one other question was just like, how do you get started and like why, but just be really honest with yourself. Like, are you okay getting super in the weeds and technical? And are you okay being an advocate across the board in all these different departments? And how do you hone those skills, right? Is really important. And honestly, like LinkedIn is a great resource, right? Like that's the reason I'm here, probably the reason I'm still in RevOps, and the reason I've gotten to meet so many like-minded people. And it's just such a great community. So like start there too.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to reach out, right? I think like that's, some of the first steps is like, if you have a question, ask, right? Typically most people aren't going to tell you no, right? If I can help teach somebody, more importantly, if I can help somebody not make the same mistake that I've made and learn from experience, like I want to help them with that. Well, Sarah, really appreciated your time today, and glad we finally got to talk face to face. This has been great, and love these weekly chats. Everyone, thanks for joining, and they will share out the recording from this as well. So check your inbox.
Awesome.
Have a good one, guys. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.